share some of my research. As Dean, I didn't get to delve into it as much as I would like, and as my staff knows, I keep trying to create weekly research time for me, but it's hard to do, but they're helping me with it. So this gave me an opportunity to get back on track with some of the work that I've been doing on Hindu temple architecture and Hindu temples in the United States. I wanted to let you know that you were listening to, as you came in, medieval music from North India, classical medieval music. And I also want to introduce you to one of my favorite Hindu deities, Ganesh, also known as Ganesha, Ganapati. You will see him in several of the slides this afternoon. And it's appropriate for us to acknowledge him and pay homage to him at the beginning of this, because Ganesh is known as the remover of obstacles and is approached before one goes on a journey, gets married, and has become, in, to use Western Christian terms, kind of the patron saint of students in India, to invoke Ganesh before they take exams. So again, removing any obstacles that are in the way. And I need Ganesh's help today because I haven't really run through this whole slideshow presentation. I put it together but didn't have the time to run through it, so I'm hoping that Ganesh will help me get through some of this. But you will see him again in the slideshow. Last week, Melissa Ryan began her Berggren Forum with nostalgic memories of where she grew up and how the environment and landscape has changed over the years. Well, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, known for its stockyards, barbecue, jazz, Hallmark cards, and Russell Stover's candies, having more fountains than Rome and more boulevards than Paris, and being home to the first designed shopping center in the United States, the Country Club Plaza. I attended an all-girls school with Catholic and Jewish girls from throughout the greater Kansas City area, and my family was deeply shaped by Catholic rituals and traditions, rosaries, wearing scapulars, sponsoring pagan babies in far-off lands, May Day processions, Lenten observances, meatless Fridays, and small miracles. That's another lecture. Growing up, I was familiar with Jewish and Catholic communities in Kansas City, and in high school, still at an all-girls school, awareness of Protestants came with my growing knowledge of boys, other than my brothers. Like many U.S. cities, Kansas City's avenues and boulevards are dotted with churches and synagogues of multiple denominations within the Jewish faith and the Christian tradition. But like many cities and towns in the U.S., that religious landscape is changing as religious diversity deepens with our changing demographics. Just last week, the Shawnee Dispatch of Shawnee, Kansas, part of the greater metropolitan Kansas City area, ran this headline: "At Shawnee Temple, Kansas City Hindus at home in their community." The caption that goes with this particular picture that ran with that article said, "Atul Trivedi of Shawnee, a Hindu priest, worships at the Hindu Temple and Cultural Center of Kansas City, 6330 Lackman Road in Shawnee. The temple, which draws worshipers from the entire metropolitan area and surrounding communities, is planning Diwali, or Festival of Lights, celebration on November 6th, which will include fireworks at Swarner Park. This Hindu temple was built in 1991 to provide a place for Hindus in the heart of America to worship, congregate, and learn about American culture. Mr. Mehra, who is president of the temple, says, "We wanted to build this place so you can connect with your roots." This is one of the many Hindu temples that I have visited in my travels in the United States. This image of a bedecked Ganesh also accompanied this article in the Shawnee Dispatch, which went on to explain the mission of the temple, which is to promote Hinduism's spiritual and cultural legacy of inspiration and optimism for the larger Kansas City community. About 600 people visit the temple each week to worship or to attend classes. And this particular temple is staffed by 2 priests. The temple's Diwali celebrations drew about 1,000 people or more from as far as Lawrence, Kansas, and St. Joseph, Missouri. The poster on my right, your left, announces the festival's events, and the images on the right are from this past weekend's Diwali celebration. So here you see the priests carrying the images after they've done some outside rituals and then situated the deities at the altar in the temple. This particular festival, known as Diwali, or also Deepavali, was just celebrated by many Hindus throughout the world. It's a multi-day festival marking, among other things, the new year, specifically the year 2067 of the Vikrama era, which was begun after King Vikramaditya of Ujjain defeated the Shakas in 56 BCE. There are many stories connected with this festival that celebrate the triumph of good over evil and of light over darkness. Diwali or Deepavali gets its name from the line of lamps or lights. Deepa means light, lamp, and Bali is a string. So the oil lamps are used to outline temples and homes through this particular festival. And the Diwali lasts about 5 days, but culminates on the new moon day when it's totally dark. And so these temples are lit up and homes are lit up with these little oil lamps that invite the goddess Lakshmi and other deities into the home. In general, the seasons in Indian calendars follow the sun. The months are according to the cycles of the moon, and the days are according to the phases of the moon and reconciled with the sun. So this particular festival moves a little bit throughout our Western calendar. It can be in October and November, depending on the phases of the moon. For instance, today is the 6th day, the Shashti, the 6th Tithi, the 6th lunar day in the waxing of the moon of the month of Kartik. And in fact, today is the festival of Skanda Shashti, which is a particular observance in Shiva temples, those devotees of Lord Shiva throughout the world. The Festival of Lights, Diwali, which just concluded, pays particular homage to Lakshmi here. Sri Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth, bounty, and good fortune. That's why you see her surrounded with all of these gold coins. She is shown here in her beneficent and wealth-dispensing mode. In order to begin the new year with hopes for prosperity, it's become customary for families dependent on particular trades to ask for blessings on new account books or tools of their trade at this time, and to ask Lakshmi to bless them. So you'd see in some Hindu homes that in front of their home altars they may put scissors if they're a tailor, account books if they're in business. And this is also spread here into the United States as well, too. In Chicago, Shweta Mundra, whose family runs a wholesale gemstone business, on that day takes out all of the office files from the last year, switches them over to new files, anoints them with tikas, with little red powder, and calls upon the blessings for them and offers food and prays for auspiciousness and a good new year for their business. So there you have Lakshmi. And multi-armed, as you will notice many of the Hindu deities are. About 10 years ago, the Ganesh Temple in Flushing, New York, one of the first Hindu temples built in the U.S., after multiple requests by a number of their 14,000 members, began offering Shraddha or Chokta Puja, a ritual in which Lord Ganesh and Sri Lakshmi are asked to bless everything from account books to checkbooks. At some temples, devotees bring laptops, power tools, and stethoscopes. At the Hindu temple in Maple Grove, Minnesota, Hindu priests were preparing for some of the 12,000 worshipers for Diwali festivities this year, expecting at least 1,000 of them to participate in this account puja. And this slide shows some of the Diwali pujas at the Minnesota Hindu temple. Their inside shrines and their offerings to the goddess. Another festival practice found in many homes and some temples in India around Diwali is that of Annakut, an offering and display of special sweets and savories. The timing of the Diwali festival is very near the end of the harvest, so again, a celebration of bounty and thanks for the harvest. And those thanks are given to God for those blessings. Annakut, again, take the word apart, Anna means food, and Kut or Kuta means mountain. So it's a mountain of food is offered. And this is an illustration of the Diwali Annakut at the Swami Narayan Mandir in Houston. All kinds of sweets and savories. And this is another image of a Diwali Annakut, this one from the Hindu temple in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. The foods are arranged in tiers. There is an order to this. The sweets are placed closest to the deity, because the deity has a sweet tooth. And in the center of the mountain, you'll often find a mound of cooked rice. That's particularly in temples, in Vaishnavite temples, in the shape of the Mount Govardhan, a place that is sacred in the mythology of Lord Vishnu. Now, we talked a little bit about Kansas City and then the temples in Minnesota and down in Texas celebrating Diwali. Now, right here on the East Coast, the Hartford Courant took note of the past weekend's Diwali celebrations at the newly opened Vallabhadram Temple in Newington, Connecticut. The brief article announced that on Sunday, the Hindu New Year will be celebrated beginning at 4 p.m. Many participants will be in traditional clothing and offerings will be made to the temple's deity. A fireworks display will begin at about 7 p.m. and food will be served starting at 7:30. Once again, an emphasis with this festival on light. Again, you're moving from darkness, from the waxing of the moon and the new moon into light. You're moving from evil to good, darkness to light. Now, this particular celebration in Newington, Connecticut, was very special for this Hindu community because they're celebrating this festival in a new home, a former synagogue for the congregation B'nai Shalom, which just sold the building to the Hindu community of Connecticut in October. Now, this is not so unusual, as many Hindu temples in the U.S. have gotten their starts in buildings that were formerly churches, synagogues, YMCAs, and even warehouses. The Hindu communities have transformed and sanctified these spaces, making them suitable homes for their communities and their gods. So let me show you a few of the Hindu temples in the U.S. which have sanctified previously secular buildings or sanctuaries that were used by other religious communities. The Gita Temple in Elmhurst, New York. The Hari Mandir in Flushing. The Satya Narayan Mandir, also in Flushing. The Vishnu Mandir in the Bronx. The Sri Vishnu Mandir, I believe that's also in Queens. And the Dwarkadish Temple in Harlan, New York. You'll notice that a number of the temples I've just shown you are in the New York or New Jersey area. According to the 2000 U.S. Census and the subsequent 2005-07 American Community Survey conducted by the Census Bureau, the highest concentration of South Asians are found in New Jersey, New York, and California. Many of these Asian Indians, as they are referred to in the census terminology, are Hindus. A special edition of National Geographic on Religions of the World, published this year, states that Hinduism is the world's oldest living religion and the third largest, with nearly 1 billion followers, of which 1.5 million live in the United States. This count is not far off from that projected by ARIS, which is the American Religious Identification Survey, which was conducted in 2001 and then in 2007 by the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And you'll see their projections for 2004 were over 1 million. This map is from the Religious Pluralism Project at Harvard University as of 2004, which at that point had documented over 700 Hindu centers in the United States, from large to small, and this number continues to grow. Hindus of South Asian origin are an increasing presence in our multicultural American society. The increasing number of Hindu temples marking the American landscape symbolizes the growing size, affluence, and stability of Hindus of South Asian origin. In the last 40 years, over 200 temples have been dedicated in the U.S., with at least 40 of them built according to traditional guidelines for Hindu sacred architecture. A number of these temples have become pilgrimage centers and tourist attractions for South Asian as well as American Hindus. While the teaching of Indian philosophy were known to and drawn on by the American transcendentalists, after Swami Vivekananda's attendance at the World Parliament of Religion in Chicago in 1893, a number of Americans attracted to these teachings of Vedanta established Vedanta societies. These are centers more for philosophical teaching and reflection, but sometimes referred to temples. The first such Vedanta society was established in 1906 in San Francisco, followed by the Vedanta centers in Hollywood in 1938 and Santa Barbara in 1956. A Hindu Swami of a different ilk, namely A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, arrived in New York City in 1965, spreading the traditions of bhakti and the teachings from the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavata Purana as inspired by the 16th century Bhakti saint Sri Chaitanya. The teachings of this International Society for Krishna Consciousness, known as ISKCON, appealed to a number of Americans who, in adopting these joyous teachings, became known as Hare Krishnas due to their ecstatic chants of Lord Krishna's name. And here you have the images of these two gurus that came at different stages in American history, Swami Vivekananda from the Vedanta Society and Swami Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada of ISKCON. Now, at this time in the early 20th century, the population of South Asians in the United States was small due to the Asian immigration exclusion laws and limits. In 1965, the U.S. ended immigration quotas, and the liberalization of U.S. immigration laws included clauses to support the reintegration of families. And this resulted in significant immigration from India, from family members to unite with some of their family husbands and sons and brothers who had come here to pursue graduate degrees in different professions. So it was a little after that time of immigration and later in the 70s that Hindu temples were really starting and Hindu communities were really getting started in the U.S. And many of them started in homes where immigrants gathered together to celebrate holidays, festivals, and to keep connected to the traditions of their homeland. With the desire to pass on these traditions, languages, religious beliefs, and values to their children, as these communities grew, they started looking for alternative spaces, bigger spaces, venues where they could assemble together, and started seeking out and finding space in the basement of temples and synagogues and YMCAs. Many of the Hindu cultural associations and temples that have organized since the 1970s have developed mission statements not unlike this one that's articulated by the Hindu Temple and Hindu Society of Minnesota. This is their mission statement. 1, to provide a Hindu mandir, and mandir means a temple, place of worship, in the Twin Cities area. 2, to bring into closer relation the members of the Hindu community in the state of Minnesota. 3, to provide a forum for scholarly discussions of Hindu philosophy. 4, to conduct and sponsor religious, spiritual, charitable, educational, social, and cultural activities for the benefit of the Hindu community. 5, to establish a library in the mandir that will depict Hindu philosophy and religion. And 6, to preserve and embellish Hindu traditions and cultural heritage. And last, but very important, to teach the younger members the history and development of Hindu philosophy and religion, and to inculcate a pride of their heritage, encourage their participation and involvement with daily activities of the mandir. And this you will see in many mission statements of Hindu temples throughout the U.S., the emphasis on educating the next generation and generations after them. Many of those second, third generations who were born in the U.S. and don't have otherwise connections to India and the landscape of Hindu traditions. For several decades, only those larger Hindu communities in metropolitan areas such as Pittsburgh, Chicago, New York City, and LA could afford to build sumptuous structures in traditional styles. The Hindu scholar Surendra Bharadwaj has noted that most temples in North America are not architecturally identifiable as Hindu temples from their exterior. Smaller communities have opted for more modest buildings with a simplified exterior, saving traditional detailing of motifs and figures for the interior. Now, he wrote that in the early 90s. Since that time, there has been perhaps an explosion of transforming these otherwise not recognizable structures as Hindu temples to much more Indian-style architecture. In fact, a number of these communities embarked on plans to, quote, Indianize their temple exteriors. And that's some of the language used in additions to some of these structures and in structures that are being built. And also the language authentically Hindu comes up a lot too. And that also I reference Melissa's talk from last week talking about authenticity. The language used in the description of their Hindu temple development plans is to make the temples more authentically Hindu, conforming to particular architectural principles, styles, and values found in the ancient Vastu and Agama Shastras that are relevant to religious architecture and worship. The renowned temple in Flushing, Queens, the Sri Mahavallabha Ganapati Devasthanam, also known as the Ganesh Temple, began in 1973 and was the first Hindu temple to follow traditional Hindu texts on sacred architecture. However, because it was built up around the frame of a structure that was previously a Russian Orthodox church, its claim to being the first Hindu temple in the U.S. to be built according to Vastu Shastras is trumped by the Sri Venkateshwara Temple outside of Pittsburgh, consecrated in 1976. Both of these temples have become pilgrimage and tourist sites for Hindus in the U.S. Their exterior walls are adorned with detailed sculptures of deities, and intricate reliefs are found on the temple inside and outside. The Ganesh Temple, and this is an interior shot of it, and you see a puja being done there, actually a milk bath being given to Lord Ganesh by the priest, is a stunning temple located on Bound Street in Flushing, and it's visited by hundreds of Hindus each week for both individual and communal worship, for religious festivals and cultural activities, and it's also the headquarters of the Hindu Temple Society of North America. The construction of the Flushing Temple is in the classic Hindu style, and as I said, was started in 1973. The building of the temple was a cooperative effort by Hindus in both India and the U.S. The Tirupati Temple in Andhra Pradesh, South India, bore the cost of the murtis, and the murtis are the devotional images, like this one here, or the larger ones that stay within the temple, the devotional images within the sanctum. And the Tirupati Temple, which is considered one, if not the most wealthy temple in India, has also sponsored many of the images that have come to live in the temples in the U.S. The Tirupati temple also contributed the granite structure for the principal deity and oversaw its carving in India. It took 200 traditional craftsmen known as Shilpis 2 years to complete the carving of the black granite shrine, which was then shipped in parts to be assembled in Flushing. Then some 25 Shilpis came over from India and worked side by side with Italian stonemasons to complete the temple in Flushing. And because we're talking about the Ganesh temple and I've introduced him to you, I wanted just to take a little minute to show you most Hindu deities. There's a whole rich iconography that goes with understanding their different arms, their heads, their bodies. And Ganesh is always shown with a big belly, abundance, again, and enjoyment. And he usually has some sweets in front there with him, sweeten his life and your life as well, too. And most of the deities have what's called a vahana, or a vehicle, or a companion. And Ganesha's is the rat, or the mouse, and as it says down here, that represents desire, because the little mouse can want to steal the sweets, and unless it's under control. But also there's a sense that even in our American mythology, there's a mythology about mice and elephants not mixing, but the fact that they can work together is symbolic of how we can transcend the different divisions that we have in our life. So there's a little picture of Ganesh. Now, according to one of the people that I've worked with in my research is Badun Basu, an architect in Connecticut, who's been the principal architect of a number of the Hindu temples on the East Coast. And according to him, the Flushing Temple was the first temple in the United States to be built according to traditional principles of sacred architecture as prescribed in the Sanskrit text. And these texts specify that temples should be built on an east-west axis with the sanctum situated in the west, from which the main deity gazes out on the rising sun and also the approaching devotees as they come into the temple. Rajagopuram, the main spire, marks the main entrance to the temple. Each of the 5 main sanctums is marked by a dome, and I'm still referring here to the Flushing Temple in Queens. The largest and highest dome is centered over where the deity is housed, which is usually called the Garbhagriha, the womb. Most Hindu temples welcome visitors, and when visiting a Hindu temple, which I encourage many of you to do, the following guidelines that the Ganesh temple advises are to be respected by all visitors. They say the temple is a center for devotion, worship, performance of religious functions, and expressions of gratitude to the deity. Sanctity of the temple must be respected, and silence must be observed to avoid disturbance to the temple activities. Suitable attire is recommended, and in all Hindu temples you remove your footwear before entering the sanctum. The Sri Venkateshwara temple in Pittsburgh, this one right here, it was, as I mentioned earlier, was consecrated in 1976, and it was built with donations from Hindus around the country, many of them first-generation immigrants. And as I mentioned, it was also the first U.S. temple to be built from the ground up according to principles of Hindu architecture. This particular temple is modeled after the famous Venkateshwara temple in Tirupati, the one I just referred to, the very wealthy temple in India, which is in Andhra Pradesh in South India, built in the 7th century. Actually here, so you see to your left the Tirupati temple, and then to the right you see the Pittsburgh temple. And you see the resemblance in the structure, the influence there in that traditional structure. Now, Hindu temples are considered to be the earthly homes of gods and goddesses who otherwise dwell in the heavens, one of the 5 stratas of the cosmos. Hindu religious traditions are rich in stories about gods and goddesses who manifest themselves in their powers in response to the supplications of their devotees. And many temples include subsidiary shrines for attendance to the main deity. So, for example, in the Ganesh temple in Flushing, while Ganesh is the main deity, there are many other little shrines throughout the temple that devotees pay homage to. And here's a range of some of the very popular deities. In India, the architectural profile of many Hindu temples resembles a small mountain range. In classical northern temples, this effect is created by a series of peaks called shikaras, and this is a North Indian style here. An elaborately carved spire depicting the feats of this particular temple is actually in Khajuraho in northern India. You may have heard of their very famous series of temples in Khajuraho. So this is the particular style of North Indian architecture. The South Indian style of architecture is characterized by a spire, and in just a second I'll show you a slide that shows you the difference between the two styles of temples. And here you see a particular example of the Swami Narayan Mandir in Toronto, Canada, and then this Khajuraho temple on the right. And do you see the formation of mountains, different peaks? And this is a line drawing of that Khajuraho temple, and then on your left, right, this is a picture of the Himalayas. So again, you see it's echoing the rhythm and the flow and the peaks of the mountains reaching up to the skies. Here you see an example of the two main styles of Hindu temple architecture. The northern style, which is characterized by that shikara, more mountain-like, and the southern style, the Dravida style, and this is called a gopuram, and it's usually over the gateway that you enter in, but there will be a lot of different smaller gopuras at different entrances to the temple complex. And South Indian temples, a lot of them have walls built around the larger complex in which there are multiple shrines besides the main shrine, and there'll be gopurams over each of those entrances. The traditional Hindu temple is not designed for communal worship, though the outer courtyards or a separate assembly hall are often used for special events that draw large crowds on festival occasions. When you enter a temple in India, it's really like entering a mountain cavern. There's very little light, and you progress through increasing sort of darkness and dampness as you get deeper into the cave or womb-like center of the temple where the deity resides. Two of the traditional features of Hindu temple architecture that are incorporated into American designs are this east-west orientation of the main sanctum and a circumambulatory path around the sanctum. The temple is oriented to the east, as I said, which is the auspicious direction, because that's where the sun rises to dispel darkness. Some traditional temples are designed and informed by a gridded floor plan, which the image of the archetypal image of the cosmic man spreads out yogi-like, symmetrically filling the grid, his navel at the center. So this is actually from an ancient Sanskrit architecture text where you see the image of the cosmic man in a yogi position filling the grid. There are rules of shape and proportion in these authoritative texts of Hindu traditions, which give birth to a variety of complex temple designs. The Burhat Samhita, which is a 4th century text, says that the temple should reflect the cosmic order. This slide shows two Vastu Purusha mandalas that are plans for temple building from architectural texts. The texts are very prescriptive about where the columns go, which deity goes in which direction and in which part of the grid, and how these deities relate to one another. Here you see an architectural plan for the Hindu temple in Wappingers Falls, New York, which is laid out on this grid plan. In India, where Hinduism is in its many forms the dominant religious landscape, you find many separate temples to different deities, such as Krishna and Shiva and the goddess, all within one village or one neighborhood, not unlike what you would find in, small Main Street USA, though not in our Main Street of Alfred. But many of you know if you go into certain towns and villages in the U.S., you'll have an Episcopal church on one corner, catty corner from a Methodist church, adjacent from a Catholic church, and diagonal from a Presbyterian church. That's very similar to what you would see in India. You wouldn't usually mix up some of the main deities. There would be the Krishna temple and the Shiva temple and the goddess temple. However, in the U.S., where Hindus are in the minority, temples have to serve a wider range of Hindu denominations, and their worshiping communities incorporate a much wider diversity of regional and linguistic groups than do most temples in India. In fact, many Hindus in India, they identify not with the nation of India as much as with certain regions of India that tie them to the food and the landscape and the language of that particular region. For instance, at the temple in Flushing, there are some 32 different deities that are available for worship, and the devotees include Bengali, Tamil, Hindi, and Gujarati speakers, just to name a few. Now, American temples in the U.S. also, as they've evolved, have been built in stages, and part of this has to do with how the Hindu communities have started growing and how they've started saving together as communities to start building a community center. So often they have a master plan for a bigger complex that includes a community center, a school, a temple, and they start with one of those. And most often they start with a community center. This is the Hindu Temple of Rochester, located in Pittsburgh, and it's an example of a temple with a master plan. And you'll see the image down here shows the future look of the temple once it has its gopuram, which you see over there, which would be in the northern style. But this is what it looks like now. And here are some of the deities that reside inside the temple. So as they save money and do their fundraising, they build different stages of the community center. And here, a lot of the other deities that are in residence at the Rochester Temple. Often a community hall is the first thing they build because it's multi-purpose. Sanctums are then added to enshrine the deities. Some plans incorporate housing for the priest and his family, though in some temples they rent housing for their priests. Many communities arrange to have shilpis, these master craftspeople, come over from India at the time that the temple is being built to do a lot of the sculpting and the reliefs on the temple. These shilpis are traditional stone cutters and carvers, and they come to work on the decor. And interior ornamentation includes everything from paintings to relief, but once again, all part of a master plan. The sculpting and placement of images of the deities is regulated by religious tradition, as I mentioned, and the images are made usually in India by sculptors knowledgeable about traditional iconography, and then they're shipped to the American temples which have commissioned them. Several years ago, I was following the building of the temple in Middleton, Connecticut, and their main deity was coming over by boat, and they had a regular update that you could follow on the internet of where the deity was in its procession to the United States for its installation. The installation and consecration of these images signify that the temple can officially be opened to the numerous devotees who come to perform puja, which is the main worship service, and to take darshan, to gaze on the deity and have the deity gaze upon the devotee in in a sacred divine blessing. There are images of pujas right here. This is also from the Rochester Temple. This is images inside the temple when they were celebrating Hanuman Jayanti in 2005. And you see Hanuman up in the upper corner there. He is a monkey warrior deity who is renowned for his devotion as a faithful servant to the epic couple Rama and Sita. Another example of an American Hindu temple built in stages is this Hindu temple in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Here is the master plan. The building of the temple actually started 12 years ago when the Hindu Society of Minnesota picked out a cornfield in Maple Grove for their new temple. Construction of the temple began in 2004, and in 2006 the first Shilpis arrived to begin working on 19 small temples housed inside the larger space, and also to sculpt the 65-foot tower. So there you see it in those cleared cornfields. And here you see this very impressive tower that stands as an archway over the temple's main entrance. And this is in the interior of the temple that, as I said, has, 19 or 21 of these small shrines. This particular temple is said to be now the largest temple in the United States. It's some 43,000 square feet. Architects on the project say that this temple combines both Midwestern and Indian elements. As you saw from the exterior, it's not as elaborate as a lot of Hindu temples because of the harsh winters in Minnesota, which would really wear down a lot of the detail on the images. Most of the ornamentation is done on the gopuram and then on the inside of the temple. So the interior shrines, which there are multiple ones, embrace different kinds of temple architecture from throughout the different regions of India. And part of this is to signify the diversity of that Midwestern Hindu community, which represents multiple regions of India and multiple linguistic groups. So here's a shot of the interior. They're beautiful gold doors, which resemble, I think, some of the doors you see to some of the great cathedrals in Italy. And another picture of Hanuman up there. The Minnesota Hindu community chose this particular temple, the 1500-year-old temple, the Vadadwaja Perumal temple in Kanchipuram in South India for its inspiration. So this is a very sacred temple in South India, in Kanchipuram, that inspired them. And so they follow some of the principles of that temple. Whereas in India, it's typical for temple patrons to stop by throughout the day for darshan and puja. In the U.S., this is really less feasible, especially since temples are few and far between. So these factors, changes in the religious practices of Hindus in the U.S., have influenced the architectural design of Hindu temples in the U.S. In India, there's not a lot of communal worship typically, and you don't even need to go to temple. Many people perform their devotions at home. But in the U.S., because it brings a community together in more than just religious ways, Hindu temples in the U.S. build much larger spaces in order to bring their community together, which can draw anywhere from 30 to 2,000 worshipers. So this requires a flexibility of sanctuary space. So you'll find interior spaces of American Hindu temples designed to be more communal as compared to that more womb-like a temple interior that I was telling you about that characterizes many Indian Hindu temples. Another difference in the U.S. is an emphasis on light, which is an innovation in emerging styles of American Hindu temple architecture, and particularly in the temples of Bada and Basu. Most Hindu temples are windowless, but at the Hindu Temple and Indian Cultural Center in Wappingers Falls, Basu has built in skylights and one large window that draw the light from the auspicious eastern direction, creating an opening to the heavens that can invite and illumine the interaction between human and divine. Most Hindu temples in the United States also serve as cultural centers for families of South Asian background, and the diverse cultural and religious needs of these communities are often taken into consideration in the design and layout of American temples. They've also caused some disputes and some splits among the American Hindu community. The temple in Wappingers Falls serves not only different regional groups, but also different religious groups, namely Hindu, Arya Samaj, Jain, Parsi, all different communities in the Hudson Valley. But despite the religious and linguistic diversity, the feel of the Wappingers temple is one of communally shared space. The main temple is large and open. It's a carpeted room that can accommodate quiet devotion of a single worshiper, but also the bustling of a traditional Hindu wedding. And in typical Indian fashion, there are no pews or chairs. The only seat in the temple is reserved for God. Filled with natural light, the great room transforms itself from sanctuary to wedding hall to performance space and represents several of the significant innovations in Hindu temple architecture in the United States. One of the things that Basu has done in order to bring in elements of traditional Hindu architecture is he blends modern and postmodern architecture with textures, colors, and geometric patterns familiar to South Asians. It has a modern stucco exterior over concrete block, and the stucco is tinted to resemble the pinkish or burnt orange hues of South Indian sandstone. The main sanctum faces east, according to regulation, and two thick towers rise above the western situated sanctum, each marked with a relief of an arch, which is an architectural motif in many South Asian Hindu temples. So this particular temple represents many of the growing communities of South Asians in the United States who have established roots in the American soil and seeking to preserve and transmit their religious values and cultural traditions to their American-born children. In laying a foundation for a Hindu temple and Indian cultural center, they ensure a place and community for those values and traditions to flourish. I want to kind of wrap up with a quick tour of some of the Hindu temples across the American landscape. We'll just go through them. Outside of Boston, Houston, also Houston, South Florida. This is up in Rush, New York, south of Rochester. Ohio. This is one under development in Morganville, New Jersey. Bridgewater, New Jersey. This is, I believe, in Edison, New Jersey. Milltown, New Jersey. Cherry Hill. St. Louis. Driftwood, Texas, with different design there. Irving, Texas. Tampa. Another Texas temple. Montgomeryville, Pennsylvania. If any of you live in these areas, you can go check them out. This is a very recent and beautiful temple in Lilburn, Georgia, outside of Atlanta. On one of its, I think this is the dedication day. Stunning temple. Temple at night, lit up. The Sri Shiva Vishnu Temple in Atlanta. This is in Denver, Colorado. Another temple near Atlanta. Another Georgia temple. This is the Middleton, Connecticut temple that I mentioned to you. Also Bottom Boston's design. Chicago. This is also part of the Chicago Temple Complex. This is their community hall in there, their Haveli. One under development in Rockland, Illinois. Aurora. Livermore, California, one of the well-known temples out in California. Malibu. You see that Gopunam style of South India there. This is more northern style in Nashville, the Ganesh Temple. New Brindavan, this is part of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in Western Virginia. Memphis. Can you see me? In Southern style, the walls around in the different rope rooms. Now, I would invite you to join me on my exploration of Hindu temples and religious diversities in the United States. Many Hindu temples are, in fact, most of them are welcome visitors as an opportunity to teach you about their traditions, show you around, help you gain a better understanding. So you should always consider an open invitation to visit Hindu temples because they do welcome visitors. And many of them have websites. But if you have questions about the diversity of Hindu deities and temples and traditions, because there are many ways of being Hindu, I want to leave you with this quote from the Mundaka Upanishad, which is one of the sacred texts in the Indian tradition. As from a blazing fire, thousands of sparks fly forth, each one looking self-similar to its source. So from the eternal comes a great variety of things, and they all return to the eternal finally. Because there are many ways, even in the U.S., that Hindu traditions and images pervade our lives. Stamps, New York Time Out. And for this girl from landlocked Kansas City, home of Hallmark cards, this greeting card has particular appeal, given one of the things that I study. One nation under gods.